The day I became the most hated man in Lakeside Estates was the same day I realized just how powerful a man can be when he's willing to fight back against a system that thought it owned him. My name is Remi Thorncroft, and until 2 months ago, I was living what most would consider the American dream. I'd spent 15 years building a career in venture capital and financial investment, eventually selling my stakes in several tech startups for enough money to retire comfortably at 42. A young man with wealth, freedom, and a future ahead of me. Everything I thought I wanted. But I was wrong. Money, at its core, never replaced what I truly needed: peace. It took me losing the most important person in my life to realize that. My wife, Rachel, succumbed to cancer after a year of fighting. The sharp-cutting reality of that loss made all my success seem meaningless. I had a daughter, Solon, who was now facing the world without her mother, and I had no idea how to help her navigate this grief. The first few months after Rachel's death were filled with a kind of numbness. I tried to fill the empty space in my life with work, but nothing could erase the silence that filled our house. The only time I saw Solon smile was when we fished together on the weekends. Solon and I had always loved to fish. It was our thing, the one activity that allowed us to temporarily escape the sorrow we both carried. The lake had been Rachel's favorite place, and it was there that I promised myself we'd begin healing. When we moved to Lakeside Estates, I thought we had finally found a place to reclaim that peace. The community was upscale and picturesque, with its homes lining the shores of a serene 6-acre lake. The realtor made the pitch sound ideal. "A family-friendly neighborhood," she said, "close to good schools, and, of course, everything revolves around the lake." I didn't care much about the details of the HOA. The realtor mentioned it briefly, but she reassured me it was just standard stuff: lawn care, exterior paint colors, and some other minor restrictions. "The HOA president," she said with just a hint of hesitation, "is really focused on preserving the community's value." I didn't think much of it then. I was too focused on what mattered: a fresh start for Solon and me. The lake was our sanctuary, a place where we could rebuild our lives, where the healing could begin. Have you ever been slapped with a rule you didn't know about? A rule that was meant to silence you, to push you out of a place you belonged? Have you ever felt the weight of an injustice so heavy you knew you had to act, but all you had were your wits, your strength, and the will to make them listen? Tell me, what did you do? That Saturday morning in April was supposed to be no different. Solon and I had woken early to fish, our routine after the long, exhausting weeks of school and work. The air was cool but not chilly. The sky was clear, and the water was like glass, perfect for a day of peace. Solon was in her element, sitting by the edge of the dock, concentrating on the quiet flick of her line as she waited for her next catch. She had caught her second bluegill when she looked up at me, beaming with pride. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on her face in months. I watched her for a moment, then turned back to my own line, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. The weight of the world seemed to lift, if only for a few moments. Fishing had become our lifeline, a way to hold on to something positive amid the grief. The serenity of the lake, the quiet, the simple pleasure of watching her slowly reel in her catch. It was enough to remind me what we were fighting for. That was when she showed up, Karen Wellington, the HOA president. I saw her striding toward us, her ponytail swishing sharply with each step, dressed in expensive athleisure wear that seemed out of place for a Saturday morning by the water. Her expression was severe, her eyes cold. She wasn't here for a friendly chat. She was here to impose her power. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the stillness of the morning. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked up at her, confused by the intrusion. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep it light, offering a friendly tone. "Just enjoying some fishing with my daughter." I extended my hand in greeting. "I'm Remi Thorncroft. We moved in a couple of months ago, over on Sycamore Drive. She didn't even acknowledge my hand, her eyes staying fixed on the fishing gear. "Mr. Thorncroft," she said, her voice suddenly more official, "fishing is explicitly prohibited in this community lake. This is a direct violation of HOA regulations. I'm issuing a violation notice for $500. I froze. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard her right. I felt the tension rise in my chest. "There must be some mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The realtor specifically told me fishing was one of the community amenities. It was one of the main selling points for us." Karen's lips curled into a thin smile, but her eyes remained cold and unfeeling. "That regulation was amended last month," she said, holding up her tablet as if I were supposed to be impressed by the screen she was showing me. "Every resident was notified via email." "I didn't get any notification," I said, my frustration building, but I still kept my tone level. "I would have remembered." "Perhaps you should check your spam folder," Karen said dismissively, tapping on the tablet as though I were the one to blame for this misunderstanding. "I can't be responsible for residents who don't check their emails." I felt my jaw tighten. I knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. There was more to this. "Why was fishing banned?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "This lake is stocked with fish. We've always practiced catch and release." "Environmental concerns," Karen replied coolly, her gaze sweeping over the lake like it was beneath her. "The hooks could harm wildlife, and we've had complaints about the smell of fish and bait disturbing the residents who enjoy the views from their homes." I looked around the lake. The water was clear, the fish were plentiful, and the only disturbance here was the woman who had decided that we didn't belong. "We're being careful," I said. "We clean up after ourselves. We're not disturbing anyone." Karen's gaze hardened, and for the first time, I could see the underlying arrogance in her eyes. "This isn't a public fishing hole, Mr. Thorncroft. We maintain certain standards in this community. People who have lived here for years expect a certain level of decorum." The implication was clear. This wasn't about fishing. This wasn't about the lake. This was about power. About control. About making sure that someone like me, someone new, someone different, didn't get comfortable in her perfect little world. I looked down at Solon. She was staring at Karen with wide eyes, confusion mixed with hurt. "Dad, why is she being so mean?" she asked softly. I placed my arm around her shoulders, trying to soothe her as much as I could. "We'll pack up, sweetheart," I said quietly. But there was a fire growing inside me now. "Please send me the fine details and the updated regulations." Karen's smile returned, triumphant, almost like she'd just won a battle. "Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other now. Make sure to check your email more carefully in the future." She turned and walked away, her footsteps light on the manicured grass, leaving me standing there with my daughter, my mind racing. As we gathered our things, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a fine. This wasn't just about fishing. This was about something bigger, about the power that people like Karen wield in the name of rules, in the name of authority, and how easily they use it to crush anyone who dares to question them. That evening, after we returned home from the lake, Solon went to her room to do her homework. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the email inbox I had just scrolled through again. Empty. No fishing ban notification, no updates from the HOA. I'd checked my spam folder. It was all just as I had expected. Something wasn't right. I felt it deep in my bones. Karen Wellington wasn't just enforcing petty rules. There was something more to this. I could feel it in the way she had approached us that morning, like she was waiting for us to slip up. It was like she was looking for an excuse to throw her weight around. I had a decision to make. I could accept this fine, pretend it was just an odd misunderstanding and move on. But I had already seen the way she looked at me and Solon, the dismissive way she spoke to us. She wasn't concerned about the lake. She wasn't concerned about fishing. She was concerned about controlling the people around her. I wasn't going to let that happen. Uncovering the systemic issue. I knew I needed to find out more about the HOA, about Karen's role in it, and about the rules she enforced. She'd mentioned that the regulation had been amended a month ago. I had a feeling it wasn't the first time she'd made a change for her own benefit. Over the next few days, I started digging. I went through the documents I had from the realtor, and then I contacted a few of the neighbors, making up some excuse about wanting to know more about the HOA's rules. Everyone I spoke to mentioned Karen, but no one had much to say about her, except Merrick Henderson. Merrick lived 3 doors down, an older man with silver hair and a sharp mind. The first time I spoke to him, he'd greeted me warmly, his friendly demeanor hiding something deeper. When I mentioned the conflict with Karen and the fishing ban, his friendly expression immediately darkened. "Ah, you've met Karen, have you?" he said, his voice lowering. "Let me guess. She quoted some obscure regulation and issued you a fine, didn't she?" I nodded, surprised by how accurately he had pegged the situation. Merrick leaned in a bit closer, lowering his voice even more. "Karen's been running this place like it's her personal kingdom," he said, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "She's been the HOA president for 8 years, and she's been abusing that power for just about as long." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. A neighborhood where I thought we'd find peace was being controlled by one woman who had her fingers in everything, pulling the strings of the community for her own gain. I asked Merrick if he could tell me more. He hesitated at first, then nodded, leading me into his home. Over coffee, he pulled out a folder filled with documents, printed emails, meeting minutes, and a pile of HOA records. He explained how the lake was part of a larger development deal, not owned by the HOA at all, but by Meridian Development Corporation, the original developer of the community. What most people don't realize is that the HOA doesn't own the lake, Merrick said. The developers lease the rights to the HOA for a 30-year term. That lease expires in 2 months, and I've been hearing rumors that Karen's trying to buy the property for herself. I felt a surge of realization. This wasn't just about fishing. This was about money. The lake wasn't a shared community asset. It was a potential gold mine, and Karen was working behind the scenes to control it. Merrick and I spent the next couple of hours going over the history of the community's development, its ownership, and the details of Karen's financial dealings. She had connections with real estate companies, and it seemed she'd been quietly acquiring properties in the neighborhood, all under the radar. Through shell companies, properties were bought and sold at prices well below market value. She was acquiring the homes of residents who had been fined into desperation. "Most people just pay the fines, stay quiet, and keep their heads down," Merrick explained. "Karen's not just looking to control the lake. She's using her position to get the best properties at a discount. She buys them up, renovates them, and flips them for a profit." I was stunned. Karen wasn't just an overbearing HOA president. She was a criminal, using her power to manipulate people and line her pockets. But I couldn't stop there. I had to know more. The deeper the rabbit hole went. A few days later, Merrick connected me with Samuel Washington, a retired banker and one of the few residents who had openly criticized Karen's leadership. Samuel was an older man, refined and articulate, with a sharp intellect and a quiet anger that burned beneath the surface. When I met him at his house, I could sense he'd been waiting for someone like me to come along. "I've been tracking Karen's activities for years," he said, pulling out a collection of spreadsheets and property records. "I started this project as a way to keep track of the HOA's behavior, but over time, it became clear there was a pattern." Samuel showed me the data he'd compiled, records of property violations, fines, and the personal connections Karen had with the HOA board. It wasn't just about fishing or minor infractions. It was about control, about using her position to squeeze every last drop of value from the community. "We've got enough evidence to take her down," Samuel said, his voice steady but fierce. "We just need to be smart about it." Strategizing the next move. With Merrick's and Samuel's help, I started mapping out a plan. We couldn't just confront Karen. She had too much power in the community. Instead, we had to outsmart her. I began pulling all the public records I could find on Meridian Development Corporation. Samuel reached out to some of his old banking contacts to get information on Karen's personal finances. What we uncovered was disturbing. Karen's real estate business, Wellington Properties, was leveraged to the hilt. She had taken out multiple lines of credit against her properties, funding her acquisitions and lifestyle. If the lake deal fell through, she'd be in serious financial trouble. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Karen, it was about stopping her before she destroyed everything in her path. She didn't care about the community, she didn't care about the residents, she only cared about herself and her profits. But I also knew one thing. This wasn't just her fight. It was mine now. I had to protect Solon and me. We weren't just fighting over fishing rights anymore. We were fighting for control of our lives. I started making moves. It wasn't going to be easy. Karen was too powerful. But with the right information and a little help from Merrick and Samuel, I felt ready to take her down. Ending the section. One afternoon, as I sat in my office poring over more documents, I got a phone call. It was from Samuel. "I've got the smoking gun," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've confirmed through one of my old contacts that Karen has been in talks with Meridian to buy the lake property. She's already lining up investors. She's planning to flip the lake and build luxury homes along the shore." The realization hit me hard. The stakes had just gotten much higher. I wasn't just fighting for fishing rights anymore. I was fighting for the very soul of the community. The fight had only just begun. But I knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't going to get away with this. Not if I could help it. I spent the next few days gathering as much information as possible. The more I dug, the deeper I went into Karen's web, and the more I realized how deeply embedded she was in this community. Every document, every meeting, every conversation seemed to trace back to her. She had managed to place herself at the center of everything, her reach extending far beyond what I had initially realized. The lake wasn't just an amenity. It was the heart of this entire neighborhood. It was the last piece of undeveloped land in Lakeside Estates, and Karen knew that if she could control it, she could control the entire community. I wasn't just fighting for my right to fish. I was fighting for the freedom of every resident who had been quietly silenced by her power. Merrick and Samuel had become my most valuable allies. They had a deep understanding of how the HOA functioned, the people involved, and the tricks Karen had been using to keep everyone in line. But none of that had prepared us for the first wave of retaliation. It started innocently enough. More violations. I came home to find a notice taped to my door citing a lawn maintenance violation. It was ridiculous. My lawn was perfectly manicured, better than most of the other homes in the neighborhood. But there it was, written in bold, official HOA language, demanding that I remedy the issue within a week or face a fine. It wasn't just the lawn. A day later, I received another citation, this time for the incorrect height of my mailbox, followed by one for improper placement of the recycling bin. Each violation was more absurd than the last, and each one carried a fine, escalating with each passing day. By the end of the week, I had accumulated nearly $1,000 in fines for issues that had never even been raised before. Karen's intention was clear: wear me down, force me to comply, or get me to leave. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to let her push me out. If anything, it only solidified my resolve to take her down. I was ready to play the game. Over the weekend, I made my move. I hired a lawyer, a sharp young woman named Nicole, who specialized in real estate and community law. She was no stranger to HOA battles. And after a brief conversation, it was clear that she knew exactly how to fight back against the kind of harassment Karen was running. "I've dealt with her type before," Nicole said, flipping through a stack of papers as we sat in her office. "Karen's not just playing dirty. She's breaking the law. These fines, the violations, she's using them to manipulate the residents, force them into submission. You're not the first person she's done this to, and you won't be the last. But I can help you take her down. The question is, how far are you willing to go?" I didn't have to think about it. As far as it takes. With Nicole's guidance, we began strategizing. We started by documenting every violation Karen had levied against us. We built a case, systematically proving that the HOA was violating its own rules, misapplying fines, and abusing its power. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, I had the legal backing to fight back, but I wasn't going to stop there. Karen wasn't going to simply give up her hold over the neighborhood. She would fight back, and I needed to be prepared for the inevitable retaliation. So, I began planning more than just a legal strategy. I started quietly reaching out to the other residents who had been targeted, offering them a way out of Karen's grip. Samuel helped me organize secret meetings in the back rooms of local businesses, inviting anyone who had been wronged by Karen's leadership. Slowly, word spread, and more residents joined our cause. It wasn't just the new residents. Longtime homeowners who had suffered in silence for years started speaking out, telling their stories of how Karen had pushed them out, made their lives miserable, or forced them to sell their homes at a loss. Karen's reputation was crumbling, and she didn't even know it yet. She thought she could control the situation, but she had underestimated one thing: the power of people coming together when they had nothing left to lose. The first public confrontation came when Karen called a mandatory HOA meeting. She was ready to push through her latest scheme, an increase in dues, an expansion of the lake access fees, and a vote to approve a series of new community improvements that would directly benefit her. She had hired a public relations firm to manage her image, and she was presenting herself as the benevolent leader of a community that would be elevated by her vision. The meeting was packed. I had made sure of that. People from every corner of the neighborhood, many of them formerly silent, filled the room. As Karen began her speech, I sat back, watching her with quiet satisfaction. She was so confident, so sure that she had the upper hand. What she didn't know was that she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "I propose that we implement a new special assessment for lake improvements," Karen said, clicking through her PowerPoint slides with a sense of superiority. "This will allow us to modernize the area, build new recreational spaces, and, most importantly, increase property values for everyone here." I could feel the tension in the room. People weren't buying it. I knew what she wasn't saying. The real reason behind the improvements was to line her pockets, not to benefit the community. The room fell silent as Karen finished her presentation. I stood up, making my way to the front of the room. "I'd like to address the board," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I've listened to what you've proposed, and I have a few things to add." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Thorncroft, this isn't the time or place for your grievances. This is a community matter, and we're trying to do what's best for everyone." "Oh, I'm well aware of what's best for the community," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "But what I'm hearing isn't a plan to improve the community. It's a plan to further your personal interests. A plan to enrich yourself and those who already benefit from your power." I turned to the crowd, my eyes sweeping across the room. "I've spoken with many of you over the last few weeks. I know what's really going on here. The fines, the threats, the manipulation. Karen has been using this HOA to bully and pressure us into submission. We've been told what to do, how to live, and when to speak up. But that ends today." Karen's face turned red as I continued. "I'm not here to fight for fishing rights. I'm here to fight for everyone who's been silenced, pushed out, and taken advantage of. And If you vote for these new assessments, you'll be complicit in her scheme to profit from this community. You can keep living in fear, or you can stand up and demand better." The room erupted in murmurs. People were talking to each other, whispering, unsure of how to react. Karen's confident facade was starting to crack. "I know what's coming. Next," I said, turning back to face her. "You'll try to intimidate me just like you've done with everyone else. You'll levy more fines, make more threats, but it won't work anymore. I'm done being afraid of you." Karen tried to speak, but the room wasn't listening. Her power was slipping away, and she knew it. That night I gathered with Samuel and Merrick, going over our final plan. It was time to hit her where it hurt the most, her business. I had the legal documents ready to go. We'd found enough evidence to prove that Karen had been misusing HOA funds and resources for personal gain. But it wasn't just about exposing her. It was about making sure she couldn't come back. We filed the paperwork the next day, and within 48 hours, the news hit. Karen's real estate business was under investigation for fraud, and the HOA board was being audited for mismanagement of funds. It was the beginning of the end for her. As the investigation unfolded, Karen tried to rally support, but her lies were becoming increasingly obvious. Residents were speaking up, revealing the truth about how she had manipulated the system. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone she had taken advantage of. The final blow came when Karen tried to hold another community meeting, hoping to salvage what was left of her power. She walked into the room, expecting to face the same frightened residents, but instead she was met with silence. The room was full of people who had had enough. I stood in front of her again, this time with the confidence of knowing that I had the support of the entire community. "You've lost, Karen," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "You've lost everything. The people you've tried to control are no longer afraid of you." And with that, the reign of Karen Wellington came to an end. The weeks that followed Karen's fall from power were nothing short of surreal. The community I once thought I'd never truly belonged to was beginning to shift in ways I never anticipated. The first signs of change were subtle. Discussions in the coffee shop, casual conversations in the park, and people coming up to me on the streets. It wasn't just the newer residents who were coming forward, but even the long-timers, those who had been too intimidated to speak out for years. They were starting to share their stories, to connect with one another, to finally realize they weren't alone in their suffering. Karen's real estate empire was crumbling under the weight of the investigations. The fraud charges, the audits, everything was beginning to snowball. What had once been an unstoppable force in her mind was now a series of bad headlines and legal threats. She was forced to sell her homes, liquidating assets she had previously accumulated at the expense of the community's well-being. Her reputation had been destroyed, and with it, her career. The former HOA president, the woman who had wielded control over everyone in this neighborhood, was now scrambling to rebuild the life she had so carefully constructed. She never saw it coming. That's what I told myself when I thought about everything that had led up to this point. She had assumed she could control me the same way she had controlled everyone else. What she didn't know was that I had spent my career learning how to break down systems. I knew how to navigate around people like her. I knew how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The final nail in Karen's coffin came when the HOA board was forced to re-elect new members. A few months after the dust had settled, the community held an emergency meeting to restructure the HOA entirely. It was a meeting I knew would come, but I couldn't shake the feeling of relief when it finally did. There was no longer any doubt that the residents had reclaimed their neighborhood. Sapphira Duskland, a woman who had once been too scared to speak out against Karen, was elected the new president. I had seen her around, quietly nodding along. During meetings, too timid to express her true feelings. But that day, as she stood before the crowd, her voice was steady and sure. She was ready to lead the HOA into a new era, one that didn't revolve around power, but rather community and fairness. The shift was real, and it was happening right before my eyes. For the first time since we had moved to Lakeside Estates, I felt like I could breathe. I looked over at Solon, who had been by my side through all of this. She had been my strength, my reason to fight. I had seen the toll this battle had taken on her, and I could tell she was starting to feel the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. I knew the worst was behind us, but it still didn't feel like everything was finished. Solon and I had become a bit of a local fixture, not because of my personal wealth, but because we had stood up for what was right. Our story, the fight we had fought together, had become something that gave others hope. People who had been too afraid to stand up to the HOA were now coming forward. They had seen that it was possible to win. It wasn't just the new people anymore. Even the old guard, those who had once bowed to Karen's power, were now joining the fight. Solon had found her own strength in all of this. She'd always been quiet, reflective, but now she carried herself with a quiet confidence I hadn't seen before. She was learning how to stand up for herself, how to fight for what was right, just like I had done. As I watched her interact with the neighbors, I realized she had become more than just my daughter in this fight. She had become an integral part of the community's transformation. The lake, which had once been a symbol of division and control, had started to regain its former beauty. Under the new community trust, it was being restored to its natural state. What had been neglected for so long was now being nurtured back to life. The fish population was thriving, and the water quality was improving. The lake had become a symbol of renewal, a place where the community could gather and truly heal. One evening, as Solon and I sat by the newly restored lake, I realized that this wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about something much bigger, something more important than the battles I had fought, than the battles I had won. It was about the legacy we were building, the foundation we were laying for the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water, Solon looked up at me. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" she asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. I smiled, the kind of smile that only a parent can give to their child when they've seen them grow and overcome so much. "I think she would be proud of both of us," I said, my voice thick with emotion. The quiet in that moment was comforting, peaceful. It was the kind of peace I had been searching for since Rachel had passed. We had fought so hard, and now, finally, I could see the result of our efforts, not just for me, but for everyone who had been affected by Karen's reign. Solon and I had done something that went beyond standing up for ourselves. We had sparked a movement, one that would change the entire community. As I looked out over the water, I realized that the fight was never about the lake. It was about rebuilding what had been broken. It was about taking a place that had been held hostage by fear and greed and turning it into something better. The next few months were filled with the kind of work that doesn't always make headlines, but matters nonetheless. The HOA was restructured, and new guidelines were put into place. Rules were no longer enforced arbitrarily. Term limits were imposed on board members, and transparent voting procedures were established. A community fund was created to pay for shared improvements, ensuring that no one person could ever again control the development of Lakeside Estates for their own gain. Karen's real estate business, once booming, was now a shadow of its former self. Her personal finances were in ruins, and she was forced to sell her home, a bitter reminder of the power she had lost. I had heard that she was trying to move to a new neighborhood, but no one was willing to buy her properties. No one wanted anything to do with her. The community had made sure of that. 1 year after the storm had passed, the transformation in Lakeside Estates was palpable. The neighborhood was thriving again. People who had once been divided by fear and intimidation were now working together to build something better. The residents who had been victims of Karen's schemes were now helping to lead the change. There was a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before, a shared pride in the neighborhood they had helped reshape. Solon and I hosted a community fishing day at the lake, an event that had become a tradition for us. Nearly every family in the neighborhood showed up, even the ones who had once been too scared to attend HOA meetings. Children laughed and fished together. Parents spoke to each other across social circles that had once been rigidly separated by Karen's influence. It was a scene of unity, of healing. Solon was out there, too, helping to organize the event with a group of kids from the neighborhood. As I watched her, I saw the same spark in her eyes that had first appeared when she'd reeled in that second. Bluegill on the lake. She was confident, happy, and at peace. I knew then that everything we had fought for was worth it. That evening, as we sat together on the dock watching the sunset, Solon looked at me and smiled. "Mom would be proud of you, Dad," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. I smiled, back, my heart full. "She would be proud of both of us, sweetheart," I said, knowing that we had not only honored Rachel's memory, but had also built something that would last long after we were gone.